The year is 1945. Japan has just surrendered. The war is over, but for Iva Toguri, it's just beginning. She sits in a prison cell, accused of being the most notorious radio villain of World War II, Tokyo Rose. Outside, GIs swap stories about this mythical Japanese temptress, a voice of seduction and fear crackling through the radio waves. But here's the twist. Tokyo Rose wasn't a real person. She was a legend, a ghost, a name given to any woman broadcasting in English from Japan. And Iva Toguri, just one of many, was about to pay the price for a crime she never really committed. Imagine this: American soldiers, exhausted and far from home, hear a woman's voice, soft, sly, dripping with propaganda. "Why are you fighting for a country that doesn't care about you?" she asks. The troops are hooked, terrified, curious. Who is this woman? Is she even real? Or is she just a story someone made up to scare them? But the FBI wants answers. They need a villain. And Iva Toguri, a Japanese-American woman stranded in Japan, becomes their target. She insists she was forced to broadcast, that she helped prisoners of war, that she never wanted to be Tokyo Rose. But no one listens. The evidence is shaky. The trial is a circus, and the jury is out for blood. Decades later, the truth comes out. They got the wrong woman. The US government quietly admits Iva Toguri was scapegoated, convicted on flimsy evidence, but by then, it's too late. The damage is done. So here's the question. How did a loyal American become the face of Japanese propaganda? And why did America need a villain like Tokyo Rose? Flashback. The Pacific, 1943. Radios crackle in the humid night air. Both sides are fighting a war not just with bullets, but with words. Japan launches 0 Hour, a psychological operation aimed at American GIs. The goal? Get inside soldiers' heads, break their morale with propaganda, sly jokes, and just enough familiar music to keep them listening. Remind them they were far from home. Make them doubt the mission. But here's the problem. The voices behind the mic aren't all Japanese. Some are Allied prisoners forced to read scripts. Others are English-speaking women, each using a different alias, each just trying to survive. Among them is Iva Toguri, a UCLA grad from Los Angeles, caught in Japan by pure bad luck. She had traveled to Japan in 1941 to visit a sick aunt. Just weeks later, Pearl Harbor was attacked, borders closed, she was trapped. She refuses to renounce her American citizenship, even as war hysteria boils over. And that decision would cost her everything. By 1943, desperate for work, she began working as a typist at Radio Tokyo. Then, reluctantly steps up as Orphan Anne on 0 Hour, pushed into it by desperate POWs who want to keep her safe and sabotage the broadcasts from the inside. They wrote the scripts, she read them. Together, they walked a razor's edge, injecting irony, satire, and sarcasm to quietly undercut the propaganda. Her style? More playful than menacing. She jokes with GIs, plays baseball scores, and spins love songs. The propaganda is so tongue-in-cheek, later analysts say it barely dents morale at all. Instead of weakening morale, 0 Hour became entertainment. Something to mock, something familiar in the chaos. But as the war dragged on, a myth began to take shape. American GIs huddled in jungle trenches imagined a singular enemy voice. They call her Tokyo Rose, a seductive, dangerous enemy. In reality, there are dozens of women behind the mic, scattered from Tokyo to Manila. None ever claimed the name. Tokyo Rose is a pure GI invention. There was no face, no real identity, just rumors and radio static. Still, the legend spread like wildfire. Back home, anti-Japanese racism is at a fever pitch. Japanese Americans are interned, their loyalty questioned. Propaganda painted all Asians as spies or saboteurs. The public is hungry for a villain. Tokyo Rose became the perfect villain. Exotic, treacherous, and female. But how did a playful radio show become a national scandal? And why did Iva Toguri, out of all the voices, take the fall? What really happened inside those radio studios? Who decided which voices would be remembered and which would be erased? And why did the truth take 30 years to surface? The war is over, but the hunt for villains has just begun. In the chaos of post-war Japan, American reporters are desperate for a headline. Journalists swarmed in like sharks. Enter Henry Brundage and Clark Lee, two journalists hungry for the scoop of the century. They chase the Tokyo Rose legend, convinced there must be a real woman behind the voice that haunted GI radios. When they find Iva Toguri, a stranded American desperate to return home, they dangle a promise of $2,000 cash for an exclusive interview. She signs a contract, hoping for a ticket back to the US, but the money never comes. Instead, that contract brands her as the infamous Tokyo Rose, the enemy siren America wants to see punished. Within days, headlines scream her name. The press paints her as a traitor, the face of wartime betrayal. US Army authorities, pressured by this media storm, arrest Toguri in September 1945. She spends months behind bars, interrogated by the FBI and Counterintelligence Corps. But the more investigators dig, the less they find. Not a single piece of solid evidence tying her to treason. Not one recording proving she ever said anything seditious. POWs and Allied officers say she helped them, not harmed them. Army reports note her broadcasts were mostly music, jokes, and harmless chatter. By October 1946, the Army quietly admits there's no case. Toguri is released, her innocence seemingly confirmed. But the story doesn't end. As Toguri tries to return to America, a new storm brews. News that Tokyo Rose is an American citizen ignites outrage among veterans and the public. Powerful voices, like radio host Walter Winchell, demand justice, calling Toguri a vile traitor, a disgrace who stabbed America in the back. The Justice Department, bowing to pressure, reopens the case. Newspaper ads beg any GI who remembers Tokyo Rose to come forward. Anyone could submit a memory, no matter how vague or unreliable. Reporters dig up witnesses, some of whom are pressured or bribed to testify. One journalist even admits later to coercing a witness to lie. Another man admitted he hadn't actually remembered her at all, but gave testimony under pressure. In September 1948, Toguri was indicted for treason, one of only a few Americans in history to face the charge. She's marched under armed guard, flown to San Francisco, treated like a war criminal, and stripped of her citizenship. The evidence? A handful of on-air comments, most of them jokes or music intros. The rest is rumor, hearsay, and the fevered imagination of a country still hungry for revenge. America had already decided she was guilty, and now the stakes couldn't be higher. If convicted, Toguri faced death by hanging. So how did a woman who played love songs become America's most hated traitor? What really happened in those secret meetings between reporters and witnesses? And would the truth ever come out? Or was Iva Toguri doomed by a story America wanted to believe? The courtroom is packed. Reporters jostle for space, sketch artists race to capture every detail. It's 1949 in San Francisco, and Iva Toguri sits at the center of one of the most disturbing miscarriages of justice in American history. Her fate and her identity hangs in the balance. Now 33, she stood accused of treason against the United States, a crime punishable by death. The prosecution paints her as the voice of betrayal, the living embodiment of Tokyo Rose. But behind the scenes, the trial is anything but fair. The judge blocks the defense from calling former colleagues, POWs, or Radio Tokyo engineers who could verify Iva's true role. The jury is bombarded with headlines and rumors, not facts. Witness after witness takes the stand. Their stories sound rehearsed, too perfect. Years later, the truth comes out. Key witnesses were bribed, coached, even threatened to lie. A Justice Department memo quietly admits that perjury was encouraged, just to get a conviction. But in the moment, the jury doesn't know this. They hear only what they're supposed to hear. That Toguri is the villain, the traitor, the voice that haunted American nights. They argued she'd used her voice like a weapon, aimed at the hearts and minds of lonely GIs. Toguri insists on her innocence. She never called herself Tokyo Rose. She never tried to demoralize the troops. Her broadcasts were filled with jokes, baseball scores, and warnings that it was all propaganda. But none of that matters. The prosecution zeroes in on a single moment, a single phrase she spoke on air, known as the fatal broadcast. Orphans of the Pacific, you are really orphans now. How will you get home now that your ships are sunk? Those 20 words became the heart of the case. They claim these words gave aid and comfort to the enemy. Her lawyers argue it's nonsense. By the time she said those words, the Allies were already winning at sea. The Japanese propaganda machine was crumbling. That one sarcastic line, they argued, couldn't possibly have given aid or comfort to the enemy. But the pressure is overwhelming. The The jury foreman later confessed he didn't think the government had enough evidence to convict her, but the pressure from the media, the veterans groups, the weight of public opinion, it was too much. On October 6, 1949, the verdict is read. Guilty on just one of 8 counts. Toguri is sentenced to 10 years in prison, fined $10,000, and stripped of her American citizenship. She becomes only the 7th person in U.S. history convicted of treason. The moment is chilling. Justice isn't just blind, it's been led astray. But what's worse, almost everyone involved would later admit something went terribly wrong. Witnesses recant, journalists confess, even the government's own files reveal a conspiracy to convict at any cost. So what happens when the truth finally comes out? And can a nation ever make amends for destroying an innocent life? After the cameras stopped flashing and the headlines moved on, Iva Toguri disappeared behind prison walls. She was sent to Alderson Reformatory for women in West Virginia. No visitors, no fanfare, just silence. She served 6.5 years behind bars, earning early release for good behavior in 1956. But freedom didn't mean a fresh start. She returned to Chicago, working quietly in her father's store, shunned by many in her own community and estranged from her husband. The Tokyo Rose label clung to her, a shadow she couldn't shake. She kept her head down. For years she said nothing. She was the most infamous woman in America, and yet almost no one knew who she really was. For 2 decades her story faded from the headlines, but in the late 1970s, a new generation began to question the official version. Activists from the Japanese American Citizens League and investigative journalists started digging into the case. CBS Evening News and 60 Minutes aired segments exposing the trial's flaws, coerced witnesses, fabricated evidence, and the myth of Tokyo Rose itself. Slowly, public opinion shifted. People began to see Iva not as a traitor, but as a victim of wartime hysteria and scapegoating. On January 19, 1977, President Gerald Ford issued a full pardon to Iva Toguri, his last day in office. Her U.S. citizenship was restored, and her name was finally cleared. It was the first and only presidential pardon for treason in American history. Yet the damage was done, her youth gone, her reputation destroyed. She had been used, silenced, and nearly forgotten. The pardon barely made a ripple in the national news, but for Japanese Americans and World War II historians, it was a long overdue act of justice. Iva herself, when asked about the pardon, simply said, "Isn't that wonderful?" Her relief tinged with exhaustion. She never sought revenge, never filed lawsuits, never asked for compensation. She lived quietly for nearly 30 more years, passing away in 2006 at age 90. Today, the Tokyo Rose case stands as a stark warning, a story of how fear, racism, and media frenzy can destroy an innocent life. But even now, one question lingers. If the US government knew the case was built on lies, why didn't anyone stop it? The legacy of Tokyo Rose is a lesson about the power of stories and how dangerous they can be. What started as a GI nickname for any English-speaking female broadcaster became a national myth, fueled by racism, wartime hysteria, and a press hungry for villains. Iva Toguri, a woman who never called herself Tokyo Rose, was swept up in a storm of fear and rumor. Her life was shattered by a legend she never chose to be part of. What happened to her wasn't a mistake. It was a system working exactly as it was designed, one that silenced truth when it was inconvenient, and rewarded lies that fit the narrative. Her case was built on false memories, fake testimonies, and media hysteria. Her life was shattered, her voice stolen, and it took nearly 30 years for her to be acknowledged, not as a villain, but as a victim. Today, Tokyo Rose is remembered not as a real person, but as a symbol, a cautionary tale about how easily propaganda and media frenzy can turn innocent people into scapegoats. The myth lived on in films, cartoons, and documentaries, often portraying her as a seductive, manipulative enemy. But the truth, uncovered decades later, was far more complex. A reluctant broadcaster, a victim of circumstance, and a woman who paid a terrible price for a crime she did not commit. Iva Toguri's pardon in 1977 was a rare act of justice, but it came too late to undo the damage. Her story stands as a warning. When fear and rumor take over, anyone can become the monster the public demands. The Tokyo Rose case reminds us to question sensational stories, especially in times of crisis. It urges us to look beyond the headlines and ask, who is being blamed today and why? So ask yourself, how do we make sure history doesn't repeat itself, and whose story is still waiting to be told?